Is this working?
Hello everyone, it is I, Sofinho of Alone in the Labyrinth. I'm back again, recording a very quick episode, I think, as I'm sat in my basement at work on a Sunday, because it's a place where I can get a little bit of peace and quiet. But very soon, a colleague of mine will be arriving to do some oil painting, which I suppose isn't very noisy, but I don't think they're going to appreciate me prattling on in the background about dice and elves and dragons and, well, not that I'm going to be mentioning any of those things, but you catch my drift. Last time I recorded me reading out a previous blog post, which was kind of a narrative actual play report, and I had a thought at the end of it, which is, well, one, all of these already exist in written form on the Alone in the Labyrinth blog, and it's added to week by week. Two, I still think I'd like to continue recording them, but also what might be quite useful is after I complete a session to actually record a podcast about it there and then, rather than reading out the write-up, if that makes sense. One of the things about the write-ups that I've done is that they're quite narrative, in terms of they're written as stories, which are describing events that took place within a game. So I don't make any references to the players in the write-ups. I don't make any reference to mechanics or anything like that, although everything will have been determined by roleplay rather than like following a script or anything like that. The reason I do it that way is because when I remember a session, the longer that time has passed between actually playing and then committing to write it down and reporting it. That was my colleague messaging to say, hey, I'm going to be along in a sec to paint. The longer time that's passed between playing and then writing up, the less I remember about the actual game itself, and the more I remember just the events of the world's fiction, if that makes sense. So I remember like what happened to the characters more than what happened to me and the players at the time, usually anyway, which is cool. But also it does mean that over time I sort of change what happens in my head, I think, not deliberately, but just you forget details, and maybe it's not so interesting because it's not like an actual story, it's just a random series of stuff usually, which has happened as a consequence of sandbox play. So it's rarely epic battles between sorcerers, and usually hours and hours spent whittling bits of wood and trading stories with other Neolithic and proto-Neolithic folk. Right. So with all that in mind, here is my summary of a game I played last night, where I'm just going to not describe it in terms of, immersed within the fiction of a fantasy world, and just describe what happened in terms of real life. I'm starting to get confused already. I mean, what is real? You're listening to a disembodied voice. I could be an AI that's been generated to... I could be a ghost inside your phone. You just don't know. Like, you really don't. So, consensus reality. We all agree that I'm a real person, and I had a real life experience, which I'm going to tell you about now, but the real life experience concerned the creation of a fictitious one. This is why I don't read postmodernist philosophers or any philosophy. I don't have the intellectual capacity to process all of that. Okay, so last night I sat down at a computer and over Discord I was joined in a voice chat by Semiurge of archonsmarchon.blogspot.com, the Xandard, aka Alex, who I met on the Garblag Games Discord server, who has played in a couple of my games. I've played in a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay one-shot of his. I hope to play in some of his other Warhammer games in the future. And also Jen Furious, who joined the PARIAH Discord that we have. I think we met on the OSR Discord, I'm not sure. Anyway, over Discord we sat down, and it's a continuation of a campaign which started with the session in the last podcast. It's now run into, that was our 13th session last night. It's designed to be an open table sandbox game, although there is a continuous story and a repeated cast of characters, although they are replaced and renewed, die off, retire, take rest every now and then. And at this stage in the campaign, in the previous session, which was, I think we had about 5 or 6 players in that one, it was quite big, there was a confrontation with a nest of ghouls, there were some serious injuries, and an ancient spirit of a weird haunted tree was set on fire, and they also forgot to rescue an old man who was buried alive under a pile of sand, which was a bit of a tragedy, but I'm sure they get over it. Anyway, in this instance, we rejoin the party with a couple of players missing. One just as well, because Eugene's character was unconscious, I think, and Wolf's character, called Worm, was in a bad way as well. So the remaining players and their characters had to make a decision. It was dawn. They were on a beach which was known to be haunted by flesh-eating ghoul men and women. They were also in charge of a young girl who seemed to be at least partially inflicted with a ghoul-type disease. She did have a predilection for human flesh and had already displayed that, but seemed to respond well to instructions from Jen's character, undecided over the yellow one. A lot of the names will probably sound quite ridiculous if you've not done the character generator before, but yeah, God, this is very rambly, isn't it? Alright, so basically, there was some umming and ahhing. Semiurge's character, Wither, was also pretty badly injured, so he decided to roll up an additional character to play for this session. And because of the nature of the game, it's set in a prehistoric kind of, proto-Neolithic environment, so most of the characters are hunter-gatherers, and we generally just drop in a new character by having them wander in from the edge of the jungle or out of the sea or somewhere, going, I've been kicked out of my tribe, are you looking for a travelling companion? And take it from there. So we did that in this instance. We had Semiurge's new character, who was called something crazy, and I've written it down here. Mortally Garnished of the Fallen. Please look at the perchance generator I've got, just to get some of these names. I'm particularly proud of this, because I don't think I've had a single repeat yet. There must be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of combinations of names, which range from maggot to something crazy like child of the many-armed mother. Right, so Mortally Garnished of the Fallen, who was described as being particularly well built but perhaps a bit scruffy and dirty, was attempting to fish in the sea using a sack to catch fish, obviously not having a great deal of success. Spotted by Undecided over the Yellow One, who called him over and invited him to join them for breakfast. She had also given some food to Alex's character. Little is the gazelle, normally called Gazelle for short, and he was taking a quick rest. And after they made some introductions to this apparently slightly malodorous individual, they decided that Worm was going to remain with the two injured pariahs, and in fact there was some magic cast to kind of create an illusion around them, and the remaining 4 were going to travel to this nearby village, which was the whole point of the expedition in the first place, to take a globule of maybe magical, ant honey to the coastal settlement in order to create an alliance between their human boss AitL. And anyway, so off they wandered along the sands. They were they spotted some pit traps, which had been dug right into the sand itself, covered with dry leaves and then a layer of sand. They were easily spotted, but they weren't quite sure who had made them or for what purpose. The young girl who they picked up, who was called Maggot, she was wrapped in a woolen blanket they'd retrieved from the haunted tree previously before it burnt to the ground. As she complained that the sunlight burned her, they approached this large settlement and were told to wait outside. They were told to wait inside a small enclosure while they negotiated their entry. So while they were outside, in this kind of gatehouse structure, the apparent leader of the settlement's defences discussed with them about their injured colleagues and mentioned that they were probably afflicted with a disease they called the hunger, and those men and women should be disposed of immediately. They also established that the girl Maggot, who they were looking after, was also likewise cursed. Now, they already had an agreement that they would not come to any harm, but the warrior, she stated that it would not be right for them to enter the settlement with the girl, so undecided over the yellow one, took her into the jungle, and Gazelle and Garnish entered to negotiate with the people in the village. I've just realised I'm kind of just telling the story rather than describing a session. It was difficult though. I don't think we really rolled many dice, and there was a lot of in-character discussion. And except for there was some out-of-character discussion, but a lot of it was about the game itself. Although later that would devolve into nonsense. So within this settlement there was an octagonal kind of a pagoda, so an octagonal building but open on all sides, supported by some wooden pillars. They entered to discuss matters with the elders, and it was quite a fun thing because I'd already kind of created 6 different characters to play the role of the elders of the village, and none of them would speak in a specific order or turn, or when addressed to, I would just roll a die and describe another voice responding to the request or statement that had been made by the characters. So in the middle of the room there's Gazelle and Garnish, presenting a globule of this honey and some food, and every time they say something I roll a dice, and then it gives me a number between 1 and 6, and I can choose one of the elders to talk to them. And there's 4 relatively normal ones who they can see, and there's 2 slightly weird ones, one who is beneath their feet and one who seems to be lurking in some kind of the rafters above, although they cannot see the source of that voice. And that was kind of fun because I had a kind of stern warrior guy who occupied the southern portion of the building, and to the north there was a more gentle and reflective woman with a large silver globular afro kind of haircut, and to the east an elderly woman who kept a pet owl with her, and to the west a male who seemed very interested in matters technological and also adopted a voice very similar to gazelle for some reason. Oh, in addition to that, beneath their feet they could hear a growling voice, something like this, who was always asking them less settling questions, and a completely random voice above. So I'm not going to say too much about why those decisions were made, or I'm not going to spend too much time pondering as to why I'm telling you that now. Just on the off chance, in case any of the players are listening. They spent some time there. They established that they would be able to use a coracle. They were advised about ways in which they could return to the village, either through the jungle, over the sea. They were told that there was a kind of informal alliance on the basis of the acceptance of the honey. They were also advised to kill their comrades, and the strange voice from above told Gazelle that were he to fall asleep under a starry sky that night, then he would be given a vision of a ritual which he could perform to enable him to commune with the Lord of the Dead. So a kind of standard day at the office for the pariahs. And after they left, they got to talking with a local woman who inadvertently took a lot of their stuff, which was presented as a gift, but she didn't quite grasp the concept of trade, so didn't give them anything in return, until finally Gazelle identified an ivory flute, which she invited him to play, and when he completely entranced the inhabitants with his jazz flute skills, he was permitted to keep it. And later she told them that her son would allow them to borrow his coracle, his fishing coracle, once he returned. Although she said they weren't likely to catch anything at this hour in the afternoon. They left the settlement, caught up with Undecided over the yellow one. It's always difficult when you split the party up. I think in voice games as well, just because you've got to put someone to one side. So I think we did skip back to her and Maggot at some point, just because I was very conscious that one of the players was effectively sitting there and kind of being punished for doing something that was pretty reasonable and within character, i.e. to not enter the settlement and endanger the life of Maggot. So I tried to do a cut scene. Yeah, and I say cut scene, it's kind of weird to think of those narrative things when you're more used to old school role playing, but I've played some story games recently and I'm getting a bit more flexible about the whole about the in-game fiction. Anyway, God, shall I continue? Yeah, I've started, so I should finish. They had also been informed by the elders that there was a community of pariahs that lived in the jungle that might be able to help them with the disease which afflicted their comrades, potentially, i.e. this ghoulism. But by this point, I think the game was starting to break down. We've been playing for a few hours, and we were getting caught up every so often in these little chatty tangents, and we spent quite a lot of time talking about cultural impact in the USA of the Vietnam War, and also about streaming, and we got chatting about Cave Girl's blog, Dying Stylishly, which was all about... Oh no, it's not Cave Girl's blog, it's Cave Girl's game stuff, I think, now. We just got talking about general RPG and RPG adjacent, and then society and politics and what have you. And then at some point we dragged ourselves back to the game with a little plan that the pariahs would use the coracle to drag their wounded comrades across the sand back towards the spirit tree which rides the grave undecided over the yellow one, and little as the gazelle had passed at the beginning of their journey on the previous morning. And that was pretty much our session, and we'll try and write that up in a way which makes more sense than my mind has been able to conjure, but thanks for listening to that. Oh, and before I go, big thanks again to Spencer from Keep Off the Borderlands for that message back in February, and for making me feel welcome in the Anchor podcasting community, and for taking the time to listen out. And I just want to say I wasn't at all advocating for eating birds' custard powder out of the tin. It was a warning from my own personal history to any listeners that this is not a good or enjoyable thing, and not something that you should do, especially when you're a small child in 1984, and not just for the consequences of parents find out, but for the experience itself.